Right now, somewhere on your phone, someone is telling you exactly what to eat because that's what your ancestors ate. A photo of a steak, a caption about cavemen, a promise that this is how the human body was built to be fed. If only you would stop overthinking it and eat the way nature intended. It feels ancient. It feels true. But the real answer is far stranger than anything you scrolled past today. For most of human history, there was no single diet. Not one. Your ancestors didn't follow a meal plan. They followed the land, and the land never agreed with itself. Picture waking up 200,000 years ago. You don't open a fridge. You don't scroll a menu. You step outside, and the entire question of survival depends on whatever the season decided to offer that week. On a coastline, that might mean shellfish pried loose from rocks at low tide, eaten right there in the salt air. In a frozen north, it might mean fat and organ meat from a single animal, rationed out over weeks, because nothing green grows through ice. In a dry savanna, it might mean roots dug out of cracked ground with a sharpened stick, for hours, for a meal that took all morning to earn. In a dense forest, it might mean fruit gorged on for a few wild weeks, then almost nothing of the kind for the rest of the year. There were thousands of ancestral diets, not one. And that single fact quietly breaks almost every modern claim about how humans are supposed to eat. So why does the meat-eating caveman image feel so permanent? Part of the answer is bone. Bones survive for hundreds of thousands of years, buried in sediment, waiting. Plant matter does not. A fruit rots in days. A root disappears into soil within a season. For decades, archaeologists dug up ancient campsites and found exactly what that bias predicted they would find. Animal bones scarred with cut marks from stone tools, stacked in the dirt like a menu written only in protein. Almost no visible trace of the plants that were almost certainly eaten right beside them. The evidence itself was skewed before anyone tried to read the story it told. Then, in 2011, biological anthropologist Amanda Henry looked somewhere almost nobody had thought to check. She examined the hardened plaque on the teeth of Neanderthal fossils recovered from caves in Iraq and Belgium, tens of thousands of years old, and found microscopic starch grains and plant fibers trapped inside the calculus. Some of those grains showed the telltale damage pattern left by cooking. Neanderthals, the supposed brutish meat-eaters of every old textbook illustration, had been gathering, processing, and cooking plant foods all along. That single discovery quietly rewrote a story that had stood unchallenged for a century. Because if Neanderthals were doing this deep in an ice age, what does it say about the modern humans who outlived them, in warmer places, with more options? This kind of evidence keeps showing up once scientists know where to look. Stable isotope analysis, a technique that reads the chemical signature locked inside ancient bone collagen, can reveal roughly how much of a person's diet came from land plants, from land animals, or from the sea, even tens of thousands of years after they died. The results, study after study, tell the same story Henry's teeth told. No fixed ratio, no universal answer. Coastal populations from certain eras show chemical signatures soaked in marine protein, fish and shellfish, making up a huge share of what they ate. Inland populations from the very same era, sometimes only a few hundred miles away, show almost none of it, leaning instead on land plants and game. Same species, same window of time, wildly different chemistry written permanently into their bones. Here is where it gets stranger. Big game, the centerpiece of every ancestral diet advertisement, was actually one of the least reliable food sources available to anyone. It's fast, it's dangerous to approach. It can smell a hunter coming from a mile away and vanish into tall grass before a single spear leaves a hand. Some days you come home with nothing at all. Biological anthropologist Catherine Milton spent years studying what filled the caloric gap on the days a hunt failed, which by most estimates was most days, even for skilled hunters in resource-rich environments. Her research kept circling back to the same overlooked answer. A wide range of plant foods, not meat, form the dependable backbone of the diet in many environments. Calorie-dense nuts, wild fruit in season, underground tubers when nothing better was growing. Foods that didn't run, didn't fight back, and didn't ask for a single ounce of luck, only patience, the right tool, and the knowledge of exactly where to look. Digging through dry earth for an hour doesn't make for a dramatic cave painting, but across countless ordinary days, it may have kept more people alive than any spear ever did. So if meat wasn't the daily staple in so many of these environments, why does your body still crave it so intensely the moment you finally get some? Maybe because rare things stay valuable to a brain built on scarcity. A successful hunt wasn't dinner. It was an event. A sudden concentrated hit of fat and protein after weeks of grinding through fiber and starch would have lit up the brain's reward circuitry all at once. The same circuitry that still fires when you catch the smell of something roasting 2 rooms away. That craving never updated for the modern world. It's still running on ancient settings, waiting for scarcity that, for many of you, no longer comes. Now picture something stranger still, fire as a kind of outsourced digestion. Harvard biological anthropologist Richard Wrangham built an entire theory around one idea. Cooking doesn't just change flavor, it changes biology at a cellular level. Your brain right now processing every word of this sentence may exist partly because someone, a very long time ago, learned to put food next to a flame and wait. Does that sound too simple to explain something as complicated as human intelligence? Maybe. The idea is still debated among researchers who study it, but the timeline of brain growth and the timeline of fire use line up closely enough that most scientists in the field take the theory seriously. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle the diet industry. There is no single preserved hunter-gatherer template waiting to be unlocked, because hunter-gatherers themselves never agreed on one, not even within a single group. Anthropologist Alyssa Crittenden has spent more than a decade documenting the Hadza of Tanzania, one of the last populations on Earth still living close to a foraging lifestyle. Their food sorts into roughly 5 categories: tubers, berries, meat, baobab fruit, and honey. And the balance between those 5 shifts hard with the seasons. Meat and tubers matter more through the dry months, when the land offers a little else. Berries and honey take over almost entirely once the rains return and the bush turns green again. A Hadza forager eating mostly honey and berries in March is, nutritionally speaking, living a different life than the same forager eating mostly meat and tubers in September. Same person, same ancestry, same supposed ancestral diet. 2 completely different plates, separated by nothing more than which side of the dry season the calendar happened to land on. There is no fixed macro split here. No universal ratio of meat to plant, carved in stone, waiting for a textbook to confirm it. Only constant adaptation to whatever the land happened to be offering that particular month. Which means the real ancestral skill was never eating one specific food or hitting one specific ratio. It was the ability to eat almost anything edible in reach and to switch without hesitation the moment the environment changed underneath you. That flexibility is still inside you, encoded in a gut and a set of taste preferences built for variety. It just doesn't get advertised, because uncertainty doesn't sell nearly as well as certainty does. There's a reason this kind of certainty is so appealing. Choice is exhausting. A single grocery store aisle today holds more food options than an entire ancestral band might have seen across an entire lifetime. And somewhere underneath all that abundance, an old simple question keeps surfacing. What am I actually supposed to eat? Diet culture answers that question with total confidence, because confidence sells, even when the science underneath the caption is messier, older, and far less certain than it sounds. Modern diet culture promises an answer carved in stone. Eat like a caveman, it says, as if there was only ever one caveman, eating one meal in one place, forever, instead of countless humans scattered across every climate on the planet, eating whatever kept them alive. But the real ancestor wasn't loyal to meat, or loyal to plants, or loyal to any single macronutrient at all. The real ancestor was loyal to staying alive, by whatever food the land happened to offer that day, and the next day, and the one after that, for hundreds of thousands of days in a row. So the next time something online tells you exactly what your ancestors ate, you might try asking a quieter question instead. Not what did they eat, but how did they manage to eat anything at all, in a world that never once handed them a guarantee? The honest answer isn't a meal plan you can screenshot. It's a habit your body still carries, Whether you ever notice it or not, the readiness to adapt, the patience to dig when the hunt fails, the craving that still lights up for fat and protein after a long stretch without it, and the deep, ancient relief of fire finally turning something raw into something you could actually use. Somewhere on your phone, right now, someone is still telling you exactly what to eat because that's what your ancestors ate. The real answer is that your ancestors never had one fixed answer at all, and somehow that uncertainty, that willingness to eat whatever the world put in front of them, is exactly what got you here.